I'm Joe Nye, the Dean of the Kennedy School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today to hear Benjamin William Mkapa on the economic challenges facing Tanzania. It's a particular personal pleasure for me to welcome President Mkapa because I had actually spent time in Tanzania, and we had a chance yesterday to visit about what a wonderful country it is. Any of you who haven't been there, I urge you to go. President Mkapa was born in 1938 in Tanzania and attended Makerere College in Uganda, where he majored in English and graduated in 1962. He then became a Foreign Service officer and went from that to becoming managing editor of the Nationalist Uhuru in Tanzania. In 1974, he was appointed press secretary to the president. And after serving as High Commissioner to Nigeria, he went on to become Minister for Foreign Affairs. He then became Minister for Information and Culture, served as Ambassador to the United States, and went back and became again Foreign Minister and then Minister for Science, Technology, and Higher Education. So this is obviously a man with the type of career that we like to admire and prepare people for here at the Kennedy School. He has had a challenge since he's been elected president in 1995, and the challenge was to bring Tanzania forward in the area of development. And in that sense, since taking office, he has overseen Tanzania's transition from a one-party system and state-controlled economy to pluralism and the institution of market-driven reform. As the Financial Times noted recently, the results are remarkable. Tanzania still faces a number of challenges, which I'm sure he'll tell us about today, but nonetheless, his government's economic discipline has been praised by the IMF, and it offers evidence of President Mkapa's determination to move Tanzania forward toward prosperity. We welcome you, Mr. President. We're delighted to have you here at the Kennedy School. Somewhere among these many flags, you will find the flag of Tanzania, since we're proud to have had Tanzanian students here. Here we are. And the questions after your speech, which will be addressed from the microphones here, will be moderated by my colleague, Professor Jeff Sachs, who is the chairman or director of our Center for International Development here. Welcome, President Mkapa.
Dean Nye, Professor Sachs, faculty and students, ladies and gentlemen. As you can see, it's a bit bulky. But I'll tell you, this is an abbreviated version. You'll have access to the real things I wanted to say later. I shall try to abbreviate this even further so that we can have a longer time of question and answer. I thank you very much, Dr. Nye, for your kind words of introduction. It's a great honor and privilege for me to speak at the ALCO Forum of Public Affairs of the renowned Harvard University. I'm informed that the ALCO Forum is Harvard's premier arena for political speech, discussion, and debate. And it is an arena I am grateful for the opportunity to enter, and thank you all for having to come and listen to me. I hope that I shall provoke sufficient interest, discussion, and debate to do justice to this arena, to this opportunity, and to my country. I've been asked to speak on development challenges facing Tanzania. I do not know how many American people would be able to locate Tanzania on a world map, be it a political map, an economic map, or a geographical one. And herein lies one of the greatest challenges facing African countries: how to earn a noticeable and significant presence on the world scene. But even more serious is the challenge of poverty reduction, of building a sustainable economic capacity to roll back and ultimately eradicate poverty. At the domestic level, the questions include governance and the imperative of getting the macroeconomic fundamentals right on a sustainable and stable level while protecting essential social services. At the international level, trends in development cooperation, and issues of debt and globalization impact on our war on poverty. We live in a world of diverse forms of poverty, both objective and subjective. The poverty I'm talking about is one in which a human being lacks the resources necessary for a dignified life. I'm not talking of the poverty of someone who cannot afford a new car, a new dishwasher, or even a new stereo set. I'm talking of the poverty of one who unwillfully has no means for subsistence, such as food or shelter, water, or basic sanitation. I'm talking of such grave deprivation as causes misery and even loss of self-respect and dignity. I'm talking of the poverty of millions of children dying of easily preventable or curable diseases. Attempts have been made to define in monetary terms this kind of abject poverty. The World Bank puts it at an income of $1 a day. This is a very low figure, but in this world of unprecedented prosperity, 30% of the people in developing countries, including those in Tanzania, or some 1.3 billion people worldwide, live in such conditions of extreme poverty. Tragically, the number is increasing, and the wealth gap is also increasing between people, within countries and between countries. A traditional Swahili saying in Tanzania states, "Elimu ni ufunguo wa maisha," translating, education is the key to life. But according to UNICEF, despite international commitment to basic education as a human right, 1 out of every 6 people in the world will be functionally illiterate as we enter the new century. More than 130 million children of school age in developing countries, over half of them girls, will grow up without access to basic education, even as millions of others amble through substandard learning institutions, getting low quality, if any, education at all. Clearly, the cart has been put before the horse. The international community has determined certain basic human rights, but is yet to make development a human rights issue in practice. As a result, many governments, my own included, lack the capacity to guarantee basic human rights, and many citizens have no capacity to access those rights. The rights remain good intentions on paper with little effect on the intended beneficiaries. Stark realities such as these may, by impulse, drive us to a determination to fight poverty. But war on poverty is not an easy struggle, and the stakes are piled up against poor developing countries like Tanzania. In a world of inescapable interdependence, we need support in dealing with poverty. As the late British economist and historian R.H. Toney observed when he stated, and please forgive the gender bias, he said, "As long as men are men, a poor society cannot be too poor to find a right order of life, nor a rich society too rich to have need to seek it." I believe that if all governments work together in the kind of partnership that the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration and Program of Action envisages, we can still win the war on abject poverty, however difficult the task may seem. For, as another Swahili adage states, kila kufuli ina ufunguo wake. That is to say, every padlock has its key. The 21st century must give humanity the courage to seek the key to a better world in which such levels of poverty would be history. But first, we must build and promote the political and societal will in both rich and poor countries to roll back poverty. The Copenhagen Social Summit set forth the goal of eradicating poverty in the world through decisive national actions and international cooperation as, and I quote, "an ethical, social, political, and economic imperative of humankind," end of quote. And it was acknowledged that for the least developed countries, the war on poverty depended on sustained, indeed increased aid. But alas, just when more and more African countries are embracing the right policies for effective development, that is when development assistance is shrinking. The United Nations put 0.7% of GNP as the target for each industrialized country to contribute towards development assistance. And it is widely accepted that for the least developed countries, private capital flows and open trade can never take the place of aid in the short to the medium term. Aid, for instance, is required to put up the requisite infrastructure for private sector participation in our economy. Private investment in infrastructure and utilities will bear no profits yet, and the public purse is too small to bear the cost. But I also must acknowledge the phenomenon described as aid fatigue. I also recognize the debate on whether the development assistance of the last 4 decades has been fully productive. It is a necessary debate, and it will not be wise to go forward without making an in-depth analysis and learning from this experience. But in doing so, I want us to put to rest 2 misconceptions about Africa and by extension about Tanzania. The first is the postulation that we have become too dependent on aid and we like to beg. We certainly did not fight for our right to political independence in order to be economically dependent on others. We face the challenge, which the new leadership on the continent has embarked upon, to own our development agenda and to increasingly finance it from our own resources. But this will take time, and aid is a necessary transitional mechanism to sustain the momentum for growth necessary for self-development. The second aid stereotype image I want to put to rest is that Africa is a bottomless pit. There is clear evidence that in political and economic terms, sub-Saharan Africa is changing for the better. Save for a few latecomers and a few setbacks, the majority of sub-Saharan African countries, including Tanzania, are now democracies, led by governments put in power by the free will of the people. But to sustain them requires visible development and growth, which in turn for the present requires continued external support. Within Tanzania, much has been accomplished with external support in the form of grants and credits. But one should not look at the total aid received over the years and demand to see quantifiable results commensurate to the magnitude of aid. Things are much more complex than that. First, a lot of factors go into the calculus of development. It is not easy to apportion a particular development to a particular amount of aid from a particular country. Secondly, not all development is quantifiable. Certain aspects do not lend themselves to measurement. What cash value can one attach to making someone literate? Or what is the price of the life of a child who, thanks to a donor-funded vaccination program, does not die before the age of 5? Additionally, in trying to assess the impact of a given amount of aid, one has to find out how much of it actually was spent in Tanzania and how much went directly to the project concerned. There are projects in Tanzania in which 1/3 of the aid money goes to pay consultants from the donor country, 1/3 to cover overhead and administrative costs, and only 1/3 reaches the actual project at the grassroots. So our expectations for results in respect of a given amount of aid must be tempered with the realization that not every single dollar goes directly to the development project. Tanzania, like most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, was at independence very backward. We inherited little, if any, economic and social infrastructure. Colonial education was intended to produce clerks and messengers, not leaders and professionals. The infrastructure they put up was designed to facilitate the exploitation of natural resources and raw materials for European industries, not to promote local manufacturing or to add value to primary commodities. A survey conducted in 1962 showed that only 23% of then Tanganyika and now mainland Tanzania men and only 7.5% of women over 15 years of age had attended any formal school at all. And 85 out of every 100 adults were illiterate. By 1985, the rate of illiteracy was down to 10% only, and 98% of all the children were enrolled to a compulsory 7-year primary education. In 1961, that is independence, the total number of children in primary schools was 486,000. This year, 5.4 million Tanzanian children, almost half of them girls, are in 11,321 primary schools that have been built in every village of our country. Taking into account where we came from, this is quite a revolution, and the donor community was a major partner in bringing it about. I will not go into the statistics of higher education, but I do want to look at the situation of health. With the support of the donor countries, the health situation of our people has improved since independence. Life expectancy at independence was 35 years, and it rose to 52 years before the onset of the AIDS epidemic. The infant mortality rate was 225 at independence for every 1,000 live births. Today, it is 88. At independence, we had 98 hospitals. We now have 224. We had 22 rural health centers. We now have 344. And we had 975 dispensaries, and now there are 4,276. The most basic health care facility is now within 6 miles of most people, including in very remote areas. All these may not be impressive figures for an American, but they are enviable in the continent I come from. But I do agree that the challenge before us is to improve economic performance, to be able to sustain and improve existing social service delivery institutions and networks on our own. Present shortcomings in our facilities is not proof of misused or ineffective aid. Rather, it only shows that the Tanzanian economy has not grown as fast as it should have to be able to sustain the infrastructures, networks, and services built up with the support of donors. So where do we go from here? The end of the Cold War and the economic and political reforms sweeping across the continent of Africa provide new opportunities and fresh hopes. Our opportunities to engage in a mutually beneficial partnership that involves the government, the donor community, the private sector, and civil society, and hopes that we can sustain and improve on progress achieved so far. For it is one thing to say aid was not wasted in Tanzania, it is quite another to suggest that development needs have been met overall. Certainly, the question has to be asked how prepared countries like Tanzania are for the global marketplace and the science and technology century that is upon us. To give a graphic example, on average in the world now, there is 1 internet user for every 38 people. In the United States and some European countries, the ratio is already 1 to 4. But in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa, it is only 1 to 9,000. Tanzania has always believed that its greatest asset and resource is not its huge mineral tourism potential, or its vast arable land and waters teeming with fish, or its peace and stability. The greatest asset and resource is our people. And unless the quality of our human resources is geared to the new century, unless our people have the capacity to utilize these other resources, no serious development will occur. And yet, in view of the short-term restructuring targets, benchmarks, and tight budgets that are a standard prescription for structural adjustment, even existing schools do not have enough teachers, books, and other teaching aids. It is not unusual to find 50 pupils sharing textbooks you could count on the fingers of one hand, or to find a school with hundreds of students but less than 5 teachers. Yet I have hundreds of unemployed graduate teachers. I have science students with no science laboratories. Are they getting the kind and quality of education that will prepare them for the challenges of the new century? While we had a revolution in the development philosophy in the late 60s, we did not witness a corresponding quantum leap in economic development in the 70s and 80s that could sustain the facilities and infrastructure built with aid money. Yet the challenge before us is not to discard the goals and aspirations derived from that development philosophy. Rather, the real challenge is to restructure and revitalize our economy, putting it on a realistic and ascertainable growth path that will sustainably generate the resources to realize that philosophy of development. And our philosophy is one that puts the human being at the center of development as the major actor and the major beneficiary. It is a philosophy that seeks to open up opportunities for everyone, giving everyone the capacity to exploit those opportunities, including historically disadvantaged groups of whom women are the largest. It is also a philosophy that seeks to draw on our resources to the maximum before asking for help. a philosophy of self-reliance at the individual, societal, national, and regional levels. A preliminary debt sustainability analysis has indisputably shown that Tanzania is a highly indebted poor country that meets all the criteria for accessing debt relief under the HIPC initiative. One criterion is to have a per capita income of US dollars 924 or less, and Tanzania has less than 250. The government currently spends about 35% of its current revenue to service only a part of its total national debt. This ratio would more than double if Tanzania was to service the actual debt due in full. This year, the ratio of debt stock to budget revenue is forecast to be 400% compared to the HIPC ceiling of 280%. Under these circumstances, it will be impossible to attain the goal of eradicating poverty and accelerating the development process. Today, Tanzania spends more on debt service than it spends on health and education combined. In the 1998-99 financial year that ended in June, for every dollar we spent on health, we spent $4 on debt service. The same is the case with education. Quite clearly, this situation is unsustainable, both politically, not that I'm declaring my candidates for next year's election. I say this situation is unsustainable both politically and economically. And the challenge before us is to secure further, broader, deeper, and quicker debt relief, in fact, in the form of debt cancellation. We welcome the revisions made to the HIPC initiative, but here I am relieved and very happy to quote Professor Sachs in his latest publication, and I quote him. He says, note that debt relief of the HIPC countries will almost surely not be sufficient by itself to enable these countries to meet goals of improving basic conditions of public health and education in the next few years. We stress again that debt relief will have two effects: increased net resource transfers and more realistic and long-term budgeting, but that these effects will almost surely need to be augmented by increases in bilateral official development assistance to those countries that are energetically undertaking expanded programs of social spending, as well as much better targeting and design of social programs. End of quote. This is very important. Debt relief must be directly linked to social spending that attacks the root causes of poverty in a sustainable way. We in Tanzania have successfully applied this principle with visible results. Last year, we established a multilateral debt relief fund and asked donor countries to contribute to it. Until the end of June this year, 7 donor countries, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Ireland, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and the Netherlands, had dispersed almost United States dollars 88.13 million into the multilateral debt relief fund. I will read that list again. The United Kingdom, Sweden, Ireland, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and the Netherlands. ... Most of the budgetary savings arising from the multilateral debt fund and other trust funds were absorbed in the budget to protect priority items in the social sector. In other words, debt relief was immediately and in a transparent and accountable manner used to support education, health, and water programs. The use of debt relief resources is determined jointly by the government, the donor community, and the civil society to ensure correct targeting, ownership, and transparency. Debt relief to me is therefore a major development challenge upon which my presidency will be judged. Ladies and gentlemen, Tanzania, like other developing countries, is a primary product producer. We are concerned about our fate as our small and fragile economies are absorbed into a global and liberalized economic system. The system is characterized by competition between our small and fledgling firms and multinational companies that keep on merging into larger ones. There is no gainsaying that competition brings out the best in individuals and the best in national economies. Competition is a cure to some of the ills of inefficiency that developing economies suffer from. But like any medicine, it must be relevant to the disease. It must be ingested with circumspection and in accordance with a prescribed dose that relates the potency of the drug to the body weight of the patient. Clearly, giving an infant the dose of an adult could result in infanticide. The danger of Africa being marginalized, with Tanzania firmly seated on the bandwagon, is very real. According to the World Trade Organization, from 1990 to 1996, African exports of goods grew by only 2% on the average, compared to a world average of 7% and 10% for Asia. As a result, while African exports of goods represented 5.9% of world exports in 1980, that share had slumped to a pitiful 2.3 only in 1996. The challenge, therefore, is how Tanzanian and other African economies can survive, let alone benefit from this globalizing economy if this trend is not reversed. Furthermore, Africa's exports are still largely primary commodities, as I've said, for which the only constant factor is the inconstancy of their prices. As I speak to you, cotton growers in Tanzania are being paid almost half the price of their cotton of a few years back, a price not enough to recover their costs. An open and incentive market for buyers, processors, and transformers should neither denigrate nor dismiss the motivations and expectations of peasant producers. For this reason, unless the rich countries consciously mobilize the political will to help poor countries increase their share of world trade, and the rich industrialized countries moderate their share of world trade, unless poor countries are helped to develop an internal capacity for self-help, demands on aid will not end, and the dignity of the poor people will remain undermined. The gap between the rich and the poor will worsen, with its effect on domestic and international crime, terrorism, migration, and social instability. I am grateful to J. Brian Atwood, who stepped down on July 9th this year as administrator for the US Agency for International Development, for his reminding us in the world that at the turn of the century, for every dollar earned in the developing world, 9 United States dollars was earned in the industrialized world. Today, as we enter the new century, the ratio has been reversed grossly. It is a staggering 65-1. And still, we are relentlessly told we will gain from a more liberalized world market. Let me quote J. Brian Atwood. He says, "We are sending very mixed messages to our developing world partners. We say we want them to embrace democratic market economies and to enjoy the benefits of globalization. But at the same time, we withhold the assistance they need to help themselves prepare for this new world of opportunity. The sad and even dangerous reality is that globalization and the democratic market economy movement has not closed the gap between rich and poor. It is time," he says, "to end the hypocrisy. Globalization is leaving out about 2/3 of the world." End of quote. Brian Atwood. This, I say, is the case and the challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, it has often been said that with proper macroeconomic framework and correct fiscal and monetary policies, economies of even least developed countries should be able to grow and contribute to poverty eradication. Experience, including that of Tanzania, has shown, however, that necessary as it is to get macroeconomic fundamentals right, this is not the panacea for growth and development. Economic reform for poor countries like Tanzania implies much larger sacrifices in comparative terms than would occur in rich countries. For almost 14 years now, Tanzania has been on an IMF World Bank supported economic reform program. Our success in terms of getting the macroeconomic framework in order has been impressive, especially in the last few years. The GDP, which had been decelerating at about 1% a year in the 1980s, has for several years now grown at a rate of 3.5 to 4% against a population growth rate of 2.8%. Inflation has fallen from about 40% in the early 1990s to 7.6% at the end of July this year. The local currency, the Tanzania shilling, has largely stabilized and is freely convertible. Almost 67% of all public enterprises have been privatized so far. Budget deficits are narrowing and revenue collection has doubled. These successes have won us accolades within the boardrooms of the IMF, the World Bank, international financial institutions, and donor agencies. But the question has to be asked if these reforms and their successes have had any positive impact as yet on poverty at the grassroots. The answer is no. And this has far-reaching implications in a democratic society on sustained political support for reform. The people of Tanzania understood the need for austerity and supported the government's agenda for reform. But there is a limit beyond which sacrifices cease to be a virtue and support for it ebbs. The successes of economic reform must have meaning and relevance to the life of the ordinary Tanzanian in terms of enhanced government capacity to deliver, in terms of job creation, in terms of improved social services and infrastructure. But if increased government resources derived from improved economic management are all spent on debt service, what incentive will the people have to continue supporting governments in its reform program? My government is asked this question increasingly restlessly by the jobless youth, by the labor unions, and by civic organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, of special significance to me is that I am hosted by a school of government named after John F. Kennedy. If there was one source of external inspiration for the newly independent African countries of the early 60s, it was John F. Kennedy. His youth, courage, and vision had a deep impact on Africa's determination to be free, to build new nations, and ultimately to create a United States of Africa. Many of us still remember his inaugural address in 1961, when he said, and I quote, "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty." And he added, "If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich." And he really did much to help the many that are poor. His support for Operation Crossroads Africa and the Peace Corps program he subsequently launched helped to address practical problems facing the newly independent countries, such as infrastructure, health, and education. Pictures of Kennedy with African leaders of that era, such as Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, Sekou Toure, and Kwame Nkrumah, still strike a warm chord in the hearts of Africans. Before this relationship was distorted by the Cold War, many miles of roads and many schools and health facilities were built in Africa, and many young boys and girls had obtained their education under the instruction of Americans, black and white, an education that has made them the leaders of Africa today. I have talked to you today about the development challenges that we face in Tanzania and the developing world in general. But there is nothing that hard work on our part in Tanzania, we believe, with the kind of support that Kennedy was ready to give, cannot solve. Tanzania is an underdeveloped economy, in spite of being richly endowed with arable land, good climate, unique tourist attractions, a good geographical location, political harmony and stability, secure borders, and social cohesion. Our economic and social infrastructure is not well developed, and we cannot allocate adequate resources to social services such as education, health, and water. The opportunities for development and investment are immense, but the challenge is the development of the financial, technical, technological, and marketing capacity necessary to transform those resources into constructive factors of economic growth and prosperity for all our people. Our strategy, therefore, has been to open up our economy to foreign investment so that people with the necessary financial, technological, and managerial capacity, marketing skills, as well as knowledge of markets, can come and team up with us in unleashing the economic potential of our country for mutual and equitable benefit. In doing so, we have created what we believe is a very conducive and competitive environment for foreign investment, both in terms of policy, macroeconomic framework, legal and administrative guarantees, and the promotion and protection of investments. But this is not enough. We want to invest heavily in expanding and upgrading the education we give our people, especially the children of Tanzania. We need healthy people, willing and equipped to work hard and fairly remunerated, committed to earning their way in their country, in the region, and in the world. This visit to the USA is a quest for investors with such attributes as I have described, and an advocacy mission for Tanzania as a valuable and viable investment destination. Tanzanians are wary of economic charlatans and have a traditional Swahili aphorism, chema chajiuza, kibaya chajitembeza. Translated, a good thing sells itself, a bad one has to be advertised. I hope a good thing sells itself, a bad one has to be advertised. I hope that my sales pitch today has not been so high as to pass for an advertisement. Thank you very much for your attention.
I am Jeffrey Sachs, the director of the Center for International Development, and very honored to be one of your hosts here, Mr. President. You have given us a tremendous amount to think about in our discussions yesterday at the center and today in your extremely challenging and eloquent, powerful and frank words. We hope at a minimum that in addition to our audience here, we can disseminate some of these ideas via our website, which now reaches a wider and wider part of the world, of course, with almost 2 million visits last month to the website. I think your words that you've given us today can reach a very wide and important audience, and it's very important that those words do reach that audience. You've told us, and I don't need to summarize at all your very powerful message, that development is a matter of cooperation. Cooperation both with your impressive efforts in Tanzania and the need for help from the rich countries of the world. And that's certainly a philosophy that undergirds much of what we at the university, at the Kennedy School, and at the Center for International Development are trying to accomplish. We have, fortunately, time for discussion, and as people can see, especially our newcomers to the school who are enjoying their first forum with this very exciting event. We have microphones distributed throughout the room, and what I would ask is that people that want to ask a question just come up and queue behind the microphones. I will designate the questioners. We have about 15 minutes. I'd ask you to be brief in your questions, no long speeches, just questions, and we'll start over here, please.
Welcome, President Mkapa. My name is Jeremy Weinstein. I'm a student at the Kennedy School and a student of development. And I appreciate many of the challenges that you discussed in the speech today, but I wanted to draw your attention in this question period to one of the challenges that you didn't mention for the region of East and Southern Africa, and in particular, that's the challenge of war. And given the developments in Rwanda as well as in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I know that Tanzania has borne the brunt of some of the costs of refugee flows, among other things, I wonder if you could speak about the prospects, the short-term prospects for peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the longer-term prospects for peace and security in the region.
I agree that I should have addressed the factor of war in the pursuit of development in our region. It's probably because I addressed that issue in a whole speech in Sweden only 2 weeks ago that perhaps it slipped my mind. What are the prospects for peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo? I think we will have to be countries who wish the Congo well and have influence on the belligerents have a special obligation to press hard for the implementation of the Lusaka Peace Accords. The main provisions of the Lusaka Peace Accord are accepted by all the belligerents, including the rebels. What is required now is the summoning of a sustained will to implement the provisions there. They require the support of the United Nations for enabling resolutions to provide the resources with which to monitor the peace process. They will require the political will of countries to contribute to a peacekeeping or peace monitoring force in the DRC. But above all, they will require the will of the belligerents to lay down their arms, as they have agreed to do in terms of the Lusaka Accord, and give to give the peacekeepers and the national dialogue a chance. Once the guns are silenced, there is provision for a national dialogue of all the parties in the Congo, an all-inclusive dialogue to negotiate a new political dispensation, which will be democratic and certainly one of their own design. They have to be encouraged in that process of national dialogue. But above all, as I say, those who took sides in this war have to be encouraged to push the belligerents themselves to see the negotiation process and the implementation process through. That is the key. On our part, with such influence as we have, we continue to press the belligerents concerned to honor the provisions of the Lusaka Accord. The prospects are there. I would say they are better than 50%, but we'll need the support of all well-wishers, all countries that have influence on these countries that have been engaged in the war there.
Thank you. Mr. President, my name is Khalid Maddox Abdigio. I'm with the Pan-African Business Tribune here in Boston. My question to you is based around your stated need for investment in your country. What mechanisms are in place in Tanzania for potential U.S. investors to bring their experience and their service products and their capital to your country, and such as a stock exchange, and how strong is it as an emerging economy there, and also how is it impacted by the regional conflicts that have been put into place by President Museveni?
In addition to the group of businessmen and women who have accompanied me, who I'm sure will be ready to explain to you the full dimensions of the attractive climate we have created, I have also the Director General of the Investment Center. I don't know whether he's here.
Yes, sir.
Ah, yes, there he is. Please talk to him after I can assure you we have done everything from cutting back on bureaucratic procedures, customs, incentives on taxes on capital goods, etc., etc. He will enumerate them all to you.
Thank you.
They are very real. But I also must dispute your suggestion that the wars in the Great Lakes have been started by President Museveni.
Back on the second. Good afternoon, Mr. President. I've just returned from your country doing some research. And in the process of doing research on your country, I've realized that there's one issue that you have forgotten to speak about today, and that's the issue of land tenure. I was wondering if you could talk a few words about that, please.
We have we passed a new land law which provides for security of tenure for investors, both domestic and external. But the most important thing is that it liberates women. It goes a long way towards liberating women, because for once they really will be entitled to have title to lands that they acquire, because in many areas traditionally they were not supposed to inherit land. But now we have revised it so that they have equal opportunity to own land and to use it really for commercial purposes. So that has been passed. It needs improvement further, but you know, it's a process that takes a little while. When you are moving from the conservative of non-ownership and non-inheritance to a situation of equality, it takes a while to build the popular consensus around it. But we have changed the law, and certainly for investors it is secure.
Moving over to the right here.
Thank you, Excellency, for your most insightful remarks. My name is James Mwangi. I'm a student at the undergraduate institution. And I wondered if you could reflect on the role of regional institutions or regional groupings for economic growth, groupings such as the defunct East African Community and, you know, and its rebirth, as well as COMESA and other such institutions.
We recognize regional integration as a factor for development, and we espouse it very, very seriously indeed. We are members of the Southern African Development Community. We are members of the Community of East and Southern Africa, COMESA. We are also parties to a cross-border initiative with regard to trade, easing trade barriers between us and several countries under the, I don't want to use the auspices, the encouragement of the IMF and the World Bank. We are also negotiating, in the middle of negotiating, for restarting the East African Community. So we acknowledge regional integration as a factor for growth and development. But we need to undertake those negotiations much more scientifically this time around. You know, we had a community, as you acknowledge, which collapsed. We don't want to have a repeat of that. So we are taking a little while in agreeing on the protocols, particularly balancing the demands for a free trade in a community, as well as balancing the needs of a free trade in a community and the attractions of a common investment area within that community that has a fairly balanced distribution of destination. That is particularly in the field of industrialization. And that is the thing that we are busy trying to unravel just now in our negotiations. But I believe in the spirit of East African cooperation, we are more likely to advance the cause of the community of East Africa, East African community, much faster than the larger membership one of the COMESA or the SADC.
Please.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Wissam. I'm in the a new program in the Kennedy School, which is called the MPA-ID, which is precisely dedicated to the international development. One of the questions I had, and I guess one of the themes that we're going to be working on in school is debt and debt relief. You mentioned it today, and I don't know if it was kind of a something I thought of, but it kind of seems maybe a little bit simple, at least from the creditor nations, you know, to think that, okay, well, you know, we have Tanzania and obviously they have a lot of other nations to just forgive on that debt. So I wanted to get a little bit more insight on your part as to how you would see to such a relief, and maybe some insight into discussions that you might have had with the IMF or the World Bank, and how, you know, so that we can get to know how this is being applied in other nations.
Well, I am going this evening to Washington, D.C., precisely to carry that discussion forward. As I have said in my address, we are clearly a highly indebted poor country. And I have tried to demonstrate that we didn't line our pockets with those loans at all. And anyone who has been to our country will testify to that. But in addition to that, I have indicated that we need time. Having undertaken the reforms in the macroeconomic fundamentals, we will need time before that economy grows at the pace where it can sustain the social delivery infrastructures and networks that we were able to put in place through that aid. But we will not be able to close that gap between needs and revenues if we are going to spend more than 35% of our revenues in debt payment. So either you reschedule, but rescheduling really is just increasing the burden, or you cancel it. And I think, really, frankly, I think that they can be cancelled. The total debt in my case is 7.9, Anna? 7.9 billion shillings. And of those, 2.7 billion US dollars. And of that, 2.8 is arrears. That shows you the futility of really going on with the hypocrisy that we can produce an economic growth that can enable us to clear those, arrears and then assume a sustained level of repayment. It's ridiculous. And insisting on that pattern of government expenditure is really consigning me to my people, telling them that, more of you must die because I am paying for debts that build the dispensary, and now I'm incapable of putting medicines in that dispensary. That more of you will be illiterate because although you have mobilized your resources, including your physical energies, to build up schools in the spirit of self-help and self-development, I can't hire the teachers that I have trained to teach your children because I'm spending more than 35% of my revenues to pay arrears on debt. So this is the argument that I'm going to put forward. But I don't know.
Let me take the chance just to mention that on the CID homepage, you'll find a detailed analysis of the debt, and we're launching a website next week which will have contributions from all over the world on this question, because it is absolutely one of the most important policy questions and debates for international development. And I would certainly welcome, and we'll discuss it among all of us afterwards, the idea of maybe spending a day to go over this issue, spending a Saturday and opening up a forum on this in the near future, because I think it is one of the most important issues that needs to be debated and needs to be aired right now. And I'd be very happy and eager if there's interest to pursue that. We have time for one more question. Let me invite you, please.
Abarigani, Mr. President. My name is Lionel Desgrange from Haiti. As a professional, I devoted many years working in Africa, in Zaire first, where I learned Kiswahili, and in Ivory Coast with President Houphouët-Boigny. I was joyful to listen to you advocating North-South solidarity. We need more of those kind of speech. But you know, Mr. President, between Europe and Africa, there is an organization called Club of Dakar, where intellectuals, scholars, politicians, businessmen meet to discuss those issues. Don't you think that it is time to have an international forum like the trilateral between North and South countries where scholars, politicians, businessmen can sit down together and discuss those issues and advance new ideas on how to solve those problems. Do you foresee that kind of organization, or do you want to advocate that, Mr. President?
I accept your advocacy. I accept your advocacy. I underscore it myself too. I wish I had the resources. I would organize the first such conference if I could. It is true. We must consult more and be more open and transparent, which we are not, both in terms of North-South relations, but also in terms of South-South relations, even as we pursue the cause of regional integration. So that kind of consultation I underscore. Alas, because we in the South are lax in this matter, where the initiative is very much in the North, You have seen them meet with the leaders of Asia. I think they met in Thailand, was it? The other time. Yes. Europe and Thailand, you have the APEC now. And we are trying to see if we can meet with the African ones, the African leaders can meet with the European leaders in Cairo in April of next year. But we still can't agree on the agenda between debt and democracy.
Let me thank you again, Mr. President, for honoring us with your visit and your very, very thought-provoking and powerful words. We call the session adjourned, and we'll be seeing you soon. Thank you.